So I've zoomed in so you can really see this part. My paper, what will happen is your paper will start to dry unevenly. Obviously, some areas are going to be more wet than others. So for mine right here is still pretty wet, but areas down here and around here are drying quicker because they had less water content. So you really just kind of have to move with the painting, like I said. What I'm going to do now, I'm grabbing just a tiny bit. I don't know if you can see this. I'm using a small brush. I'm going to take a little bit of this pink. I don't have a lot of water on my brush, and please be careful with water hiding up in this part of the brush, and then it comes and splatters down into your painting. Actually, that is exactly what happened on this one. None of this was planned. It was all a mistake. Oh, sorry, I hope you can see that. It was all a mistake. And that's what I mean by kind of letting the painting do what it needs to do. So I had a bunch of water on my brush that just splashed down and made this big mess right here. So instead of freaking out trying to fix it, I just moved water all the way around my moon and just worked with what happened. So you really have to make the best of an accident sometimes. Okay, so I've got my brush loaded with just slightly wet pink, and I'm just going to do a little test in some areas, and you can see I think it is exactly perfect to accept. It's still wet enough to where it's going to accept pigment. It's just not going to move quite as much as when it was really, really wet. So I'm just going to start to come in and add some little elements of surprise and wonder. These later on I can add stars on top of. It just looks like bursts maybe in the sky. And this is also a good place to take advantage of this lovely, lovely phthalo blue color, if I can get a little of the clean color here. So I'm grabbing a little bit of my phthalo blue, a very watery or light consistency of the phthalo blue, not a whole lot of water on my brush, and I'm coming out to these outer edges, and you can see how much that color just pops. So I don't want to add too much of it, but I think just some starbursts will be really lovely. And now I'm grabbing some of my mauve, and I'm going to do the same thing. Maybe just even go around some of those blues. It really adds a lot of visual interest to your sky. And you'll know when you hit an area that, like right there, it didn't move, it didn't do much, it's too dry. So I wipe my brush off and I'm just picking that up. I can make that into a star. Nothing to worry about. Like I said, fiddlers, if you're a fiddler, you're just gonna go wild and crazy on this part. Now I have just clean water on my brush, and I'm just going to start to pick up some edges, just really kind of refining some of these and thinking about making them into stars. So I'm just using clean water and kind of wiping away some of that wet pigment, and this is where I can add a star. Sometimes what I will do also is, so this is still wet, I take my white Sharpie and I just drop some of that right into that wet area, and it's just going to add some of that white paint right into some of those areas. Really give it kind of a burst effect. Okay, from this point we are going to let it dry completely. You can use a hair dryer to get it dry, and then we'll work on adding stars. Okay, so now we're going to start to add stars, and to do that I use a Sharpie water-based paint pen. This is the fine tip, And I also use the Uniball Signo, and this is the angelic one. It has a much smaller tip. And this is just the fun part. You get to design your own sky. So you get to decide where your big stars are going to be, where your little stars are going to be, and just design your own universe. So once you've got your pinprick stars in, you can also come back and make some kind of glowing stars. So to do that, I use white acrylic ink. This is by Daler Rowney, I think is how you say it. So I use my very well used cup here. I shake it up, just put a little into my cup, and I use a very small brush for this process. This is a 0. So I grab a little of the ink and I wipe most of it off, and I usually do a little test over here on my washi tape to make sure I've got a really thin line on my brush. Decide which stars you want to have that glowy effect to, and all I do is a line up and down this way, across this way. This is also another good place to turn your paper how you need it to be. It's much easier. And then I do an X shape as well that will be smaller. So the cross is bigger and then the X is smaller. And you can do a few of those. It just kind of gives it a glowy feel. I'm just going to do one for this one. So now we'll start on the moon. So I'm using kind of a mid-size brush, and to start out with, you can see how I've kind of come into the edge here in some places, and all I do is just kind of rub at that a little, and what it does is actually brings some of that color into your moon, which is a good thing. So I just kind of rub at it just a little, just to kind of soften that edge. And then I wet the entire moon. I don't use a lot of water, so I'm not using quite as much water as I used on my background. And typically what I'll do is make this side a little wetter than this side. And I'll show you why. So once I get the whole moon wet, then I just grab some color that I've used in the painting already. Here I'm using, just grabbing some mauve and this leftover phthalo and mineral violet color. And I drop it over here on this more wet side. And I just do little drops, some on that side, rinse my brush off, and come back in with just a little water and just kind of start to put some of those edges, adding some water to those edges so I don't have too defined of line. It just kind of moves. I might even add just a little of this blue in a couple of areas, and maybe even some pink. All very light, watery, just kind of letting the paint flow into that moon. Now sometimes this is all I need to do. It looks like a good moon. That's probably all I need to do. If it gets too out of hand, you can always take a paper towel and just come in and make some odd blobs with your paper towel, and it will make it look more moon-like. If you've got some edges that you don't love, you can just use a very small brush, just kind of rub at them a little bit, and it will just kind of release some of the pigment. Don't get too hung up on this though. Nobody is going to scrutinize you over your moon, I promise. Mine are usually a big mess. This is a place where fiddling probably will not come in handy, but I do it anyway. So there you go. That is how I do my moon.